Putin has put a missile inside Russian territory and he has blown up somewhere near the administrative center in Suja. You know, one of the most embarrassing things that you can do in wartime is you know, accidentally or on purpose bomb your own country, but it's what Putin's doing right now, and the implications of this are probably quite extreme. The people around him who have kept him in power for a long time, the oligarchs of Moscow, are looking at this. They're looking at the fact portion of Russia continues to be occupied by Ukraine for the last 3 weeks, that there are hundreds of thousands of refugees heading south in Russia, massive political turmoil, and they're looking at this and probably thinking that he has to go. The news in Russia isn't going to be reporting that, but Telegram is in Russia, and everyone in that area will know that that was a Russian missile put into Russia, and word spreads pretty fast in Russia. So, probably one of the most humiliating moments for Putin since he took power ever.
So I've got Kaylin Robertson again here, from all the way over from Odessa, and we're going to talk about the bombing of the site in Kursk, I think, and the peace talks.
Well, it's pretty unprecedented. What's happened is Putin has put a missile inside Russian territory and he has blown up somewhere near the administrative center in Suja. This is, I'll bring up a map here, where around where the incursion has been happening, where the Ukrainians are, and it's blown up what looks maybe like an ice rink, but there are lots of Russians in that area, and Russia is launching missiles inside Russia where there are Russians. And that means a few different things.
So attacking Russians?
Basically. And we said a few days ago that Putin doesn't care about Russians. He doesn't care about his own people. That's why 50% of Russia is, you know, without proper toilets and electricity. You know, Putin doesn't care about anybody outside of his friend circle, his own power, and the capital city of Moscow. So, you know, it's not a surprise that he would hurt and bomb his own people in his own country. But it's, again, really humiliating for him. This is a person who thought that he could take Ukraine very, very quickly in a few days, and is now 2 years later, you know, bombing his own cities in a way that I don't think anyone could have predicted. In some ways, you know, it's quite humorous, because it's, you know, one of the most embarrassing things that you can do in wartime is you know, accidentally or on purpose bomb your own country, but it's what Putin's doing right now, and the implications of this are probably quite extreme. Putin doesn't care about the opinions of everyday Russians because they can't riot and protest because they're under the boot of fascism, but the people around him who have kept him in power for a long time, the oligarchs of Moscow, are looking at this. They're looking at the fact that a big portion of Russia continues to be occupied by Ukraine for the last 3 weeks, that there are hundreds of thousands of refugees heading south in Russia, massive political turmoil, and they're probably, I mean, if I was Putin, I wouldn't be going near any windows anytime soon. I would be not drinking tea that anyone else had made. And they're looking at this and probably thinking that he has to go, because this is now getting out of control for him. He's looking like he's completely lost touch. He's lost the plot and he's losing the war. That's how this looks. And bombing his own country, I mean, the news in Russia isn't going to be reporting that, but Telegram is in Russia, and everyone in that area will know that that was a Russian missile put into Russia, and word spreads pretty fast in Russia. So, probably one of the most humiliating moments for Putin since he took power ever.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that there are still Russians in the Kursk region. Not everybody has been evacuated. As we saw from the video of the grandmother who was blaming Putin for not having saved her. But at the same time, the Ukrainian occupation is being very benign to the Russians who are left in the area.
Well, the Russians who are left in the area still continue to surrender without almost any pushback, because they don't really know why they're fighting Ukraine. They don't really know what they're fighting for. It's a pointless war on their side of things. And they're treated pretty appallingly anyway. Being a member of the armed forces of Russia is a pretty bleak existence. The pay is rubbish, and if you die, your family get about 50 quid. But this is extremely humiliating. Also, we have seen reports that, you know, there are almost no mobilizations at the moment from Petersburg or Moscow, because Putin is so terrified of public humiliation in his image right now that he doesn't want funerals going on in those cities. He doesn't want to see military funerals going on anywhere near him, like there are en masse in towns all across Russia. So it's pretty interesting what's going on there in Kursk, and it's super relevant.
But just to push back a little bit, and to give a moment of pro-Putin bias here, because we're being accused of being Ukrainian propagandists. Do you not think that from a Russian point of view, it's quite interesting that Putin hasn't done what maybe Ukraine expected, which is to remove his forces from the Zaporizhia region and Donetsk and move them up to defend Kursk? He's basically letting Russian territory, he's ceding Russian territory in the hope that he will be able to gain territory in Ukraine.
Yeah, well, first, I think accusations of pro-Ukrainian propaganda are fine, because this country was illegally invaded by a fascist dictatorship. And in World War II, if I was reporting on the war, this would be called anti-German propaganda. And that's fine, because it's, I think, on the side of democracy and decency. Just to shut that down in the comment section with the Russian trolls. But the advancements that are happening right now in the East and the cities like Pokrovsk, those they're not soldiers being pulled out of those areas because they are incredibly strategic, and Putin has been wanting the ridge Konstantinivka, Kramatorsk to Sloviansk for a long time. The city they're about to, or probably will take, Pokrovsk, would cut off the supply lines to the south of those cities, and he's not budging in any way on those. And the reason that he has basically conceded or allowed this land to be taken in Kursk, it wasn't something he did intentionally. The Russian army is very slow moving. It's Soviet style still. It's about repositioning munitions through tanks and rail networks, gaining positions and then firing. It is not dynamic. The Ukrainian army is very dynamic. They can quickly form groups and battalions. They can quickly gather intel, and they can move around very quickly. It looks like be like if you had your granddad, take you to the park when you're a kid, and you're running around and going on the swings, and and he can't keep up with you. It's more about that than strategy on the behalf of Putin.
Yeah. But what Putin is taking over is sort of completely wrecked city. This is Dresden, isn't it? It's were you not going to go over there to?
I actually am still waiting for the type of military accreditation that I need to enter that region. That region has seriously destabilized recently, and it takes longer to get the permissions to go in. So I need a little bit more time. But as soon as I do get there, I'll report on what it looks like. It's quite hard to actually report on the movements and physically what's going on, because, the Russians are watching all of these channels, and the Ukrainians don't like their positions being updated on the internet. So it would be more, I would be going there more to capture what's going on around the city, and speak to people evacuating civilians right now, because people are having to leave, because when the Russians arrive, life turns to hell. So people are being evacuated and leaving at the moment, and that's what I'll be doing when I go and cover what's going on there.
But you say when the Russians arrive, life turns to hell. We know about Bucha, and it doesn't really matter what the propagandists try to say against that. This is not something Ukraine has done. In the meantime, the propagandists claim that it's Ukraine that has stopped peace talks, or that Boris Johnson has stopped peace talks. But I think now Russia has said that it's not prepared to enter into peace talks because of Ukraine's advance. This is right, isn't it?
Yes, but the reality is Russia would never actually engage in any real peace talks. All the rhetoric that's been coming out of the Kremlin since the start of this war has been that they want peace, and the problem is that our news feeds are filled with right-wing propaganda people in the West, people who are British and American, who repeat that propaganda, who are on the payroll of the Kremlin, and then the bots amplify all of it. All this should be shut down in seconds if our governments had any real authority in this. But one country actually has wanted and pushed for peace for a very long time, and that's this country. And all this country wants is for its original borders to be restored and for their people not to be massacred, killed, tortured, and kidnapped. And that actually is peace. Peace in Ukraine isn't conceding to fascism. It's not about land either. This isn't an argument over wheat fields in the east. This is millions of people in Ukraine who will be basically stripped of their Ukrainian identities, brainwashed, and kind of genocided in a lot of ways. I know that's a strong word, but it's a word that's used by people here who lived under Russian occupation. I was in Kherson, which is a 2-hour drive from here last year. That city was occupied by the Russians for a number of months during the initial invasion. And I spoke to people who took me to the torture chambers that the Russians took them into. And they told me that they were taken to those torture chambers and tortured for months because they looked at soldiers in the wrong way. These were shop workers and street workers. That's what life is like under Russian occupation for Ukrainians. And that isn't peace. That isn't peace at all. Peace isn't millions of people unable to leave their houses and being murdered continuously. And to call it peace means you're either a Russian propagandist or you're misinformed with this. And that's what's going to be pitched to Biden next month with Zelensky, is a proposal. And this is why it's very smart that they've gone into Kursk, because now the Ukrainians are in a very good bargaining position. And he's going to say to the president of America that they're probably going to be willing to give back Kursk if the Russians leave Ukraine alone. And if Biden has any sort of backbone, which at this point I don't think he does, because he hasn't allowed this country to even use the weapons they need to defend themselves, and he's worried that if there's any kind of escalation, Trump will jump on it and use it as campaign material against him. But there isn't going to be any escalation. If this country starts firing cruise missiles back into the launch points of the cruise missiles that are hitting things like the Kyiv Dam here, then there isn't going to be an escalation, because this country's been putting drones into buildings and into strategic points into Russia constantly for the last couple of months. And I don't see any nuclear warheads flying over the sky, not right now anyway. I don't know if you do. I certainly don't see anything. And you know, the Ukrainians hit a massive airfield 1,400 miles into Russia yesterday, and it hit. I don't see a major escalation from Putin, so this is all hysteria.
Yeah, but Ukraine is now developing its own missile, isn't it?
Yeah, well, Ukrainians have to, because the West has let Ukraine down. They haven't let them use the weapons they need to defend themselves. And again, Ukraine aren't going to be using munitions to kill civilians like the Russians do, because they're not barbaric in this country like the Russians are. They'll be putting them into the places, into the airfields, into the oil refineries, and into other strategic places to stop Russia hitting important things here. And that's completely reasonable. You know what this is? This is in the 1940s, America turning around to Britain, and it would be like them saying, here's all the weapons you need to defeat the Nazis, but you can't use any of it on German soil. You can't fire anything that lands in Germany. You can't even fly over Germany. That is no different to what's going on in this country right now. And it's letting the Ukrainian people down, and it's overcautious, and Biden doesn't want to do anything because he's at the end of his term and he's quite nervous, and none of the leaders are doing what needs to be done. It was reported in the Telegraph yesterday that the UK government actually has now wanted to, and has changed its mind and wants to allow this country to use the Storm Shadow missiles that have arrived here, but the US has told them not to. It's really difficult, but it all comes down to Biden being too cautious. And another bargaining tool that you have here in Kursk, which is really interesting, is for a long time, a lot of people, Russian propagandists, people who aren't quite informed and overcautious, have said that Ukraine doesn't have the ability to win this war, so there's no point in allowing them to fight back. They should just concede. Well, what happened in the last month in Kursk shows that Ukraine is much stronger than people think it is. They have entered Russia and stayed there for the last 3 weeks, and they're still there now, and Russia hasn't been able to do anything about it. So this country absolutely has the ability to win this war. I think it will. It just needs the West to actually let them. And I feel like it's pretty close to that point. So lots going on. And there will be lots of disinformation that we see on our televisions, especially if you watch things like GB News and on our news feeds, with people saying that it's ridiculous, it's not real peace, that this war can't be won. But actually, Ukraine can win. It's shown that in the last few weeks. It's stronger than ever. And a lot of this is just, it is just misinformation.
Yes. And there'll be plenty of information. The moment this video goes live, there will be plenty of disinformation from the comments section, I'm sure, because we have our fair supply of Russian trolls and bots leaving comments with English names.
Well, I mean, a lot of these people are real as well, and a lot of people think that because our governments have been, publicly in whether it's in name only or not, been supportive of Ukraine, that it feels counterculture and it feels like the underdog to be anti-Ukraine, or it makes them feel like they're interesting and they have an alternative point of view. But there isn't an alternative point of view. Ukraine was illegally invaded by Russia. Thousands of people have been murdered, kidnapped, tortured by a fascist regime, and this country is innocent in this. It's closer to democracy. It's a democratic country. It's a country that doesn't deserve any of this, and the West should support it. And the idea that the West shouldn't support the largest country in Europe being taken by sort of Soviet bloc Eastern country is insanity. It is within everybody's interest, if you live in Britain, to not have the largest country in Europe invaded. It makes us look weak.
I also think it's important to push back on this propaganda thing, because there is an idea that people say that in order to be balanced, you've got to present both sides. There is only one side of what is right. It's either what is right or what is wrong. And when you look at the Putin side, it is fundamentally a system which is wrong, and you only have to look at the incidentals, the attacks on the LGBTQ plus community, with the law which came in initially in 2013 and was then gradually ramped up by people like the Duma man Tolstoy, who's actually a great grandson of Lev Tolstoy, but he's an obnoxious man who looks like a toad, and first attracted attention by suggesting, by putting out anti-Semitic gossip, that Jews were desecrating Orthodox churches, complete rubbish, and then he became the flag waver of the anti-gay law, which makes it impossible to promote anything other than a traditional relationship. To question that, particularly to anybody under the age of 18, involves imprisonment and quite serious fines, and it's very difficult to prove that you haven't.
I mean, there are always going to, in the news generally, there are two sides from a journalist perspective to most stories, but genuinely there isn't sometimes. And in this war, there isn't two sides. There isn't another side. You're quite right. There is just one side, and there is, of course, the fact that many of my Russian friends have found themselves either silenced or persecuted. They've found themselves in prison. Some of them have died, and it's as dangerous being Russian in Russia as it is being Ukrainian in Ukraine. In Ukraine, the Russian fist from the Kremlin is enormously severe on its own and on others. Yeah, life there is
anybody
brutal.
That challenges its authority.
It's brutal there. And if you follow the money as well, that's what right-wingers like to say. Follow the money, George Soros. Ukraine isn't paying commentators and paying news reporters to be pro-Ukrainian. The only money that comes into this country is basically spent trying to rebuild and defend it. But the Kremlin is, and there's evidence of this, paying people to say pro-Russia crap. There is much evidence of that. Billions, actually. There are entire farms of bot farms. There are entire networks of systems that pay for news outlets and propaganda to come out and push stuff that says Ukraine can't defend itself and that Ukraine is somehow guilty in a lot of ways as well. So one side, you have billions of dollars dedicated to pushing misinformation in our countries that is pro-Russian, and you have no money put in to put out propaganda or misinformation about Ukraine. So actually, if you follow the money, I'm not getting paid to say any of this, then I think that's pretty enlightening as well.
One thing which I think is quite interesting about that is in Russian, they don't talk about They don't talk about bot farms or troll farms. They talk about troll factories, which I think really gets to the nub of the problem. These are factories, and these are very well run institutions full of people who speak a multitude of languages. It's very personalized. It's very clever. It's very efficient, and it's a forceful drive. Russia's probably being more successful with its propaganda than it is with its military prowess.
Yeah, there is a word for this as well. It's called combat propaganda, and it's something that was developed a long time ago in Russia. The KGB used to do it, now the FSB. And this is an entire education system that is dedicated to teaching Russians who are in the military combat propaganda. The West don't do anything like this. They don't have entire schools dedicated to that.
And across Russia, have you come across so now the new educational system has been pushed out, and there will be a new lesson in all schools, which is effectively propaganda.
Absolutely. Well, propaganda is what Russia does best. They don't win wars very well. It looks like they don't know how to get a sewage system going, but they know propaganda. They know how to talk, how to get people to believe crap, and how to make crap, and it works very, very well. If you look at the Russia report, which highlighted a lot of this stuff. In a lot of right-wing circles, still to this day, that's all passed off as fake because there's more Russian propaganda put on top of covering it all up. And it's really, really, really effective. Our news outlets are falling apart, and they're at the seams. There's not much money left in broadcast journalism, and they can be bought very easily by Russians as well. The Lebedevs obviously purchased the London Evening Standard, and they have a massive influence over our politicians and our politics still to this day, and it works very well, and it's highly funded. It's not spoken about enough, but it could be shut down pretty easily. Our leaders could absolutely take a lot of this out. We've got some of the best intelligence services on the planet. We've got the CIA in the UK. You've got amazing intelligence systems. We could find out the flow of money into people that are saying these things, and we could shut them down pretty quickly, but we're not, because everyone is too cautious and too weak right now. And the people in charge of our countries don't realize that Russia is also at war with us.
It's also useful to hear what people are saying. Now, on the subject of what people are saying, Galen, I think I have to prod you, because you finally set up a YouTube channel.
Yes.
And I think we need to direct people to your channel. And I think you've done a trailer as well.
Yes.
Can you screen the trailer at the end of this? Do you think we can screen the trailer?
Yeah, I'll do that in a sec. I mean, I hadn't really been doing reports like this for Byline TV for the last few years. I was traveling across the UK covering things like Brexit, covering the election, and I always did it behind the camera. And I've since coming on your show, and in the last few days, I feel like I'm in a good position. I've got some nice feedback, and I want to start producing regular reports from what's happening in this country. And if anyone's interested, go and check it out, see how it goes.
Yeah, no, I think people really will be interested. People have been asking in the comments section, who are you? Where can they find you? So this is where they can find you, okay?
Yeah, thank you for that plug. Yeah, I'll pop the trailer at the end and a link to the bottom. I'm going to call it the Culture Report. So.
Okay, so look, we will catch up again, and we're going to do some other talks about your background too. Mm-hmm. But we'll catch up again in the next few days. Just keep safe, and keep your eyes and ears open.
Will do. Thanks. I've traveled thousands of miles across the UK to bring reports about people who voted for things like Brexit, for things like Boris Johnson, and regretted those votes. People that say that they felt lied to by politicians, and people who have given up on politics entirely because of those lies. And the people that propagated a lot of those lies haven't disappeared just because the Tory party has been wiped out. In fact, I think they've gotten even more influential. They've got shows on GB News, they've got shows on Talk TV, and their reach has skyrocketed exponentially, and they're saying the same kind of things that they did in their careers in Parliament. So it's a really worrying time in the UK. So those lies haven't stopped and misinformation hasn't stopped. I also traveled to Ukraine and made a documentary with John Sweeney about what Putin is doing to this country and how his misinformation reaches our airwaves as well. So I've now permanently located here to Ukraine to bring news reports over what's going on in this country, analysis and predictions on what's happening, and I'll be doing the same thing about UK politics. I'll be writing articles that you can read in Byline Times, and today I'm launching the Culture Report, where I'll be publishing all of my reports. So if you're interested in seeing any of these reports, if you're interested in following my work, then hit subscribe. If not, that's fine too.